Overnight, something changed. Not in a dramatic explosion on satellite, not with flashing red warnings everywhere, but with a shift. And in winter weather, a shift is all it takes. This massive storm didn't grow louder. It moved south. And that movement just pulled millions into the impact zone who weren't there yesterday. Rain lines are turning into snow lines. Cold air is already in place. Ice corridors are expanding. If you went to bed thinking you were on the safe side of this system, you may want to look again, because the South is now in the crosshairs. And what happens next depends entirely on how you respond to this shift. 1. A small shift changes big outcomes. Here's what most people miss. Winter storms don't need to explode to become dangerous. They just need to move slightly. A shift of 50 to 100 miles may not sound dramatic, but in winter weather, on that distance is the difference between cold rain and heavy accumulating snow. It's the line between wet roads and ice-covered highways. It's the boundary between minor inconvenience and full disruption. When a storm shifts south, it taps into colder air more efficiently. That changes precipitation type instantly. Areas that were safely on the rain side yesterday can suddenly wake up inside a snow band. And those bands don't ease in gently. They can drop inches in a matter of hours. That's why meteorologists watch track changes so closely. Because sometimes the most powerful move a storm makes is a subtle one. 2. Cold air is already in place. This is where the situation becomes more serious. If this storm were shifting south into mild air, impacts would be limited. But that's not what's happening. Cold air is already locked in across much of the region. It's dense, stubborn, and sitting right at the surface. When a storm moves into pre-existing cold air, it doesn't need time to cool things down. It immediately converts moisture into snow and ice. There's no transition period, no gradual changeover, just rapid deterioration. That's why southern shifts can be deceptive. It may look like just a track adjustment on a map, but on the ground, it means roads freezing faster, bridges icing first, and visibility dropping quickly. When cold air is already waiting, a storm doesn't knock before entering. It hits. 3. Ice is the silent threat. Snow gets the headlines. Ice causes the damage. When a winter storm shifts south, it often moves into a setup that is perfect for freezing rain. Here's how it happens. Cold air stays trapped at the surface, but a thin layer of warmer air slides in just above it. Snowflakes melt into rain as they fall through that warmer layer, then instantly refreeze on contact with the cold ground. The result isn't fluffy snow, it's glaze, and glaze changes everything. A quarter inch of ice can bring down tree limbs. Half an inch can snap power lines. Roads that look merely wet become skating rinks in minutes. Bridges freeze first. Overpasses ice up with almost no warning. The danger with ice is that you often don't see it until it's too late. There's no dramatic buildup, no towering snowbanks, just a thin, clear layer that turns routine travel into hazard. Southern regions are especially vulnerable because infrastructure isn't built for prolonged icing. In fewer salt reserves, fewer plows, longer restoration times if outages begin. That's why this southern shift raises concern. It increases the corridor where freezing rain is most likely. And when ice enters the equation, impacts multiply quickly. Ice doesn't need depth to create disruption. It just needs the right setup. And this storm may be creating exactly that. 4. Timing is everything. The most underestimated part of a storm shift isn't totals. It's timing. It's when a winter system adjusts south and accelerates even slightly, the entire impact window moves forward. What was expected to begin late evening can suddenly arrive during the afternoon commute. What looked like an overnight event can now interfere with school dismissal or peak travel hours. That timing shift magnifies disruption. Traffic volume is higher. Road crews are still staging. People are mid-routine, not sheltered at home. And once precipitation begins falling into cold surface air, road conditions can deteriorate in under 30 minutes. The first hour is often the most dangerous. Oil residue on roads mixes with initial moisture. Bridges freeze rapidly. Visibility drops as heavier bands rotate in. Drivers don't adjust immediately because conditions may look manageable until they aren't. And when impacts arrive earlier than expected, decision makers are forced into reactive mode instead of proactive planning. That's the real consequence of a southern shift with compressed timing. It shortens preparation windows. It reduces margin for error. It increases the chance that people are caught in transition, traveling, commuting, moving between obligations. When the storm begins asserting itself, storm strength matters, but storm timing determines who gets caught in it. Now 5. Snow bands don't spread evenly. They target. One of the biggest misconceptions about winter storms is that snowfall spreads out evenly across a region. It doesn't. Winter storms organize themselves into bands, narrow corridors of intense lift where snowfall rates can dramatically exceed surrounding areas. When a storm shifts south, those bands shift with it, and that means the jackpot zone moves. Inside one of these bands, snowfall can fall at 1 to 2 inches per hour. Our visibility collapses. Roads disappear beneath accumulation before plows can cycle back through. What looked manageable on a regional map becomes overwhelming at the neighborhood level. Just 30 or 40 miles outside that band, totals may be cut in half. That's how dramatic the gradient can be. A southern adjustment pulls the deformation zone, the area of strongest lift, into new territory. Cities that were forecast for light accumulations can suddenly find themselves under persistent heavy snow for hours. And when bands stall, they amplify totals quickly. This is why forecast maps are constantly updated. Because snowfall isn't about averages, it's about placement. And placement changes with track. If your area falls under one of these persistent bands, impacts escalate fast. Plow delays, hazardous travel, reduced emergency response speed, and extended cleanup timelines. Storm totals don't tell the whole story. Band positioning does. And when the storm shifts south, so does the bullseye. 6. Southern infrastructure is not built for this. There's a critical difference between a winter storm hitting the upper Midwest and one striking deeper into the southern tier. It's not just about snowfall totals. It's about readiness. Northern cities are engineered around winter. They budget for it. They train for it. Fleets of plows are pre-positioned. Salt domes are stocked. Road treatment begins before the first flakes fall. Drivers are conditioned to respond when conditions deteriorate. But when a major winter system shifts south, it enters a different environment entirely. In many southern regions, winter storms are infrequent. That means fewer plows per mile of roadway, limited de-icing chemicals, smaller municipal crews, longer response times, and sometimes infrastructure that simply wasn't designed to handle prolonged freezing. A few inches of snow in Minneapolis is routine, The same few inches in parts of the south can shut down highways. Bridges and overpasses are especially vulnerable. Without aggressive pre-treatment and rapid plowing cycles, ice bonds to the surface quickly. Once compacted by traffic, it becomes extremely difficult to remove. Then there's the power grid. Ice accumulation adds weight. Trees in warmer climates often retain more surface area and are less accustomed to ice loading. Limbs snap more easily. Power lines sag. Even modest freezing rain can trigger widespread outages, and restoration can take longer because crews may need to be brought in from neighboring states. Another factor, driving behavior. In regions where winter weather is rare, many drivers lack experience navigating snow and ice. That's not criticism, it's reality. Reaction times, braking distances, and steering adjustments aren't instinctive. It only takes one stalled vehicle on an untreated incline to create a chain reaction of gridlock. Emergency response times can also increase. Ambulances, fire services, and law enforcement face the same road hazards as everyone else. If widespread icing develops, access to certain areas may become temporarily restricted. Even schools and businesses feel the ripple effect. In northern states, operations often continue through moderate snow because systems are built to support it. And in southern states, closures are more likely, not because impacts are exaggerated, but because mitigation capacity is lower. This is why the southern shift matters so much. It's not simply relocating precipitation, it's relocating impact into areas with a thinner margin for disruption. A moderate winter event in the south can produce consequences comparable to a much larger storm in the north. The scale of the storm hasn't necessarily changed, but the vulnerability of the region has. And when vulnerability increases, impact potential rises with it. That's the lesson here. It's not just about how strong the storm is, it's about where it's going. 7. Track confidence is increasing, and that changes decisions. In the early stages of any winter storm, there's always uncertainty. Models disagree. One run nudges north, the next drifts south. Forecast maps shift subtly with each update, and the impact zone remains fluid. But eventually, patterns begin to align, and that's what we're seeing now. Multiple model solutions are trending toward the same southern adjustment. The upper-level energy driving the system is behaving consistently. Surface low positioning is matching projection. Radar evolution supports the trajectory shift. When independent signals begin pointing in the same direction, confidence increases. And confidence is powerful, because once confidence rises, preparation shifts from watching to acting. This is the stage where emergency managers start locking in decisions, road crews adjust staging areas, utility companies prepare crews for potential outages, schools evaluate timing windows, airports begin contingency planning. Forecast confidence isn't about drama, it's about probability narrowing. When uncertainty shrinks, impact potential becomes clearer. And what's becoming clearer now is this. The southern tier is more firmly inside the risk zone than it was 24 hours ago. That doesn't mean every forecast number is locked in. Snow bands can wobble. Ice lines can shift slightly north or south. But the broader pattern, the repositioning of the storm track, has stronger agreement than before. And that agreement carries weight, because winter storms are not just meteorological events, they're decision-making events. Businesses decide whether to close, families decide whether to travel, municipalities decide when to deploy limited resources. The difference between reacting late and preparing early often comes down to forecast confidence. And right now, the data is becoming more cohesive. Another key factor, storm structure. As systems mature, they often become more predictable in the short term. Once the energy consolidates and the low organizes, last-minute dramatic shifts become less likely. Our smaller adjustments are still possible, but the overall path stabilizes. We are approaching that phase, which means waiting for absolute certainty may not be the best strategy. In winter weather, preparation during increasing confidence is smarter than reacting during peak impact. And here's the deeper lesson. Storms don't announce their final form with a headline. They evolve quietly, gradually, until suddenly the pattern locks in and the impact zone is defined. That's where we are. The southern shift isn't speculative anymore. It's supported. And when track confidence increases, so should awareness. Not panic, not exaggeration. Awareness. Because the most dangerous assumption during a winter storm is believing you're still outside the zone, when the zone has already moved. The south is now more firmly in the crosshairs, and with growing forecast confidence, this becomes less about if impacts occur, and more about how significant they become. That's why this moment matters, not because the storm exploded, but because the path clarified, and clarity is when preparation counts most. This wasn't a headline storm because it exploded. It became a headline storm because it moved. A subtle shift south, and suddenly the impact zone expanded. Snow bands repositioned, ice risks increased, timing tightened, infrastructure vulnerability rose. That's how winter storms work. They don't always shout, and sometimes they adjust. And that adjustment changes everything. If you're in the newly expanded impact zone, now is the time to prepare, not wait. Monitor local updates. Adjust travel plans. Give yourself margin. Because once precipitation begins falling into cold air, conditions can change faster than forecasts. We'll continue tracking every model run, every radar update, every shift in timing, and keep you ahead of the storm. Stay alert, stay prepared, and we'll see you in the next update.